As I was watching this video of last week, you guys did. At one point, I heard this car honking. Thinking, is somebody outside here? And
oh, because it was on the video.
And thinking,
I've done that before.
is my neighbor's car or what?
I've done that before when the doorbell rings on the TV.
Yeah.
Dennis goes, honey, somebody's at the door. And I go, no, it's the TV.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today's message is on, we're continuing with our subject of prophets. We looked at the idea of how God speaks to us. And then we looked at what are the tests of a prophet in the Bible, right? That was a pretty hard test, right? And now we're going to look at the subject in some degree of false prophets. And really what we're going to be looking at today is the subject of man's authority versus God's authority. Okay? Why don't we start off with Revelation chapter 2, verse 20. Revelation chapter 2, verse 20. And this is speaking symbolically of Jezebel. Now, we have studied this before, and we know who Jezebel is in prophecy, right? Who would be that corrupt woman, which is a symbol for the church today?
It's a Catholic church.
Okay, the Catholic Church, right? Not the people. We're not talking against the average person who doesn't know any better.
The
but
institution, yeah.
the institution, the leadership, so forth, and even some of them are misled, but they fit a role in prophecy just as surely as, Israel was called in Isaiah. They were called, Israel and Judah were called Sodom and Gomorrah by Isaiah, So, anyway, can somebody read Revelation chapter 2, verse 20, please?
Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols.
Interesting. This is one thing that a lot of people don't notice, but it is the idea that Jezebel here, which is a symbol of the Vatican, calls herself a prophetess. Right? And we have learned that a prophet is one who speaks for God, right? It's God's spokesman on this earth, right? The one who takes God's messages and gives them to the people. Now, we all know that intuitively, we get the idea that the Catholic Church does claim to be God's representative on earth, right? To speak to the world. In fact, they had a movement not too long ago where they, I believe it was a former Prime Minister of Israel, or official of Israel, who
Perez, but he died already.
Yeah, he suggested that we would set up, instead of a United Nations, a United Religions.
Correct.
And that the Pope would be the leader of it.
Yeah, that's what he said.
And the Pope didn't think about it. Maybe I'll be the head of the world religions.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
If it suits his...
What happened though? Did it happen?
It was a proposal. It's in the works, but it's never fully been implemented.
Oh, okay.
And the proposer died already.
Oh.
Yeah, the guy. Yeah. So Jezebel claims to be a prophetess. She claims to be the one who speaks for God. But is her authority from heaven or from men? Now let's go to Matthew chapter 21. Matthew chapter 21, verse 23 through 27. Can somebody read that for us, please? And this is speaking of John the Baptist.
Now, when he came into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people, am I reading the right one?
Yes, you are.
Okay. People confronted him as he was teaching and said, by what authority are you doing these things?
Notice the key word here is authority. We're going to use that word's going to be repeated over and over again in this lesson. And this is the chief priest speaking to Jesus, and they're asking him, by what authority are you doing these things? Sorry, go ahead.
And who gave you this authority? But Jesus answered and said to them, I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, where was it from? From heaven or from men? And they reasoned among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say to us, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for all count John as a prophet. So they answered Jesus and said, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things."
Interesting. So the question about John the Baptist here was about Jesus first, was by what authority are you doing
Yeah.
these things, right?
And who gave you that?
Who gave you that authority? Isn't that interesting? They ask, who gave you in Jewish society, in their religion, they would often they would quote other rabbis. And Rabbi such and such says, and Rabbi such and such says, and they would pass down their authority almost by, well, such and such said, and then I'm quoting such and such, and he's quoting such and such, and and we are all, it's almost as if, well, this great esteemed man said it, and therefore I'm quoting him, and then he quoted him, and then we all kind of pass around the authority, right? And so they're asking, who gave you the authority, right? Is there some person on the earth that you can point to who said, yeah, I allow this man to teach, he has the authority to do so, right? I remember when I first became a Christian, and I tried to speak to some of my family members on the gospel, and I had, I won't say who it was, but in case they happen to watch this video, I had one relative who told me, and I'm having a Bible, trying to share the Bible with this person in a private home, nothing too big and dramatic. And this person says to me, you got to go get a permit to be able. You need to have, what do they call it?
Certificate or something.
A license
License or
to preach.
it's like is it credential? No, it's.
I think it's a credential.
What's the word? The authority to be a pastor. Ordination, right? You need to be ordination, right? You need to be ordained and have all these things. And I just, my mind is just intuitively just, wait, where did John the Baptist get his credential and his,
That's right.
where did he go to get his approval from men somewhere?
From man.
That's what these men were asking. Who gave you this approval, right? So show us their certificate or something, right? And Jesus asked them, well, where did John get his authority? Was it from heaven? Did God give it to him? Or was it from men? Right? And that's the question. The Catholic Church's authority, where does it come from? Is it from heaven or from men?
It's from man.
And you'll notice that the way that they get their authority is the same way that these rabbis did, and the same way my relative was talking about. It was through the permission of other men. Men saying, you have this authority, right? Instead of directly from God, which is how prophets worked. John the Baptist never went to the Sanhedrin and asked permission to give his message, right? He never went to, can I please, you want to check what I'm saying first and then I'll get approval? No, that's not how it worked. In fact, he rebuked them to their faces, right?
Yes.
Because God told him directly. Okay. So, what is this, the authority of men, and how the Catholic Church works? Has anyone ever heard of Apostolic Succession? You ever heard of that? Apostolic Succession? What about the magisterium?
I heard about magisterium.
Do you know what it is?
No,
Any idea?
That was definite.
Any idea at all?
I don't know.
It sounds kind of regal.
I heard
Like-
these things.
Yeah,
Magisterium.
loyalty of some sort or something.
What the magisterium is in the Catholic Church is the official teaching body of the Catholic Church. The group of men who have the authority.
Like the magistrates, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of where it's
yeah,
a similar word, right? So we're talking popes, cardinals, bishops. This is the magisterium, right? These are the men who have the authority to give, doctrinal statements, and the others, they are just piggybacking off that authority. They are allowed to basically repeat the same ideas. But the authority comes from the magisterium. Question?
I have actually a comment or a question. When they were asking Jesus if he had the authority to do things, or what authority he has, I think that they're just doing the same thing, that like they have authority over Jesus to tell them
They thought
whether
they did.
whether he had authority.
Yeah. They were demanding Jesus. They were demanding an answer from him as if they had authority over him. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Demanding God. What authority do you
God, what authority you're gonna say? That's ridiculous.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's men trying to be God, right? So the same thing happens in the Catholic Church. You know, the Pope claims to be God on earth. And the question is, where does he get his authority? Where does the magisterium get their authority? Well, they get it from something called Apostolic Succession. The idea is, this is a theory in the Catholic Church, it's not biblical at all, but the idea is that Jesus appointed Peter as the first pope, which is not in the Bible at all. It's a twisting of Matthew.
As the first pope?
That's what they believe.
Oh, that's when, okay,
They
yeah.
believe Peter was the first pope.
That's why when they said they found the bones of whatever Paul or Peter in the Catholic Church, so that like
They
last
think it's a
year.
big deal.
Yeah, it's, I don't.
They think Peter was the first pope. Which is interesting because in the council in Acts 15, it doesn't seem like Peter's the one making all the decisions at all.
This James.
If anything, it seems like James is the leader, but it seems like it's more of a conference, and Peter's definitely not the leader. But anyway, okay. And then Paul rebukes him, and that's recorded in Galatians 3, and Peter was not.
When was the first pope? About what time period
Um,
would they have set up the pope?
The way it worked is they had bishops in cities,
Right.
and then slowly different bishops gained more authority. So if you were in an important city and you were the bishop of that city, you got more and more authority. Well, Rome being the most important city, the bishop of Rome became more and more important.
Came through.
And the bishops of Rome originally, like, I forget his name, might have been Gregory, but he said, one of the Gregorys, but he said, if any man claims to be the universal bishop over the whole world, that's the Antichrist. And this was an early bishop of Rome, like in 300 AD. And then just a couple hundred years later, you had the bishops of Rome saying, yeah, the bishop in Rome is the universal bishop over the whole church.
Yeah.
And so it's the idea of a pope who is the head bishop
when was it
over all
actually
the
called
church.
pope?
Oh, the name pope?
Yeah, the name pope. When did that
Well,
actually?
the name simply means, it's from papa, it means father.
Right.
You know, and the idea is just an outgrowth of the idea of calling a Catholic priest father. It's just an outgrowth of that. So he's just the head father.
Well, going a step further, then when was Paul? Do you know about the time when Paul, they admitted that Paul was
When
the
he was
first
alive?
pope, made the first
Or
pope?
when did they say he was the
Oh,
first?
When
Pope
did they
Paul.
say? Yes.
Or when did they say that
Oh,
Paul
when
was
did,
the?
when
Or not Paul, I'm sorry.
Peter.
Peter, yeah.
Peter, when did they?
they claim that on the before Jesus before he went to heaven, that Peter was made the first leader of the church. When in Matthew 18, where it says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church."
Yes, yes.
They point to that and say this is Jesus making Peter the head of the church.
Yeah, but when did they point it out? That was in the 4th, 5th century.
Oh, when do they start saying that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
It
after.
was later.
They start arguing it backwards from, like
Yeah.
in 4th, 5th century.
Yeah.
Okay, that's, yeah, I just wanted to kind of.
Yeah, those arguments are never made in the first couple centuries. No
No,
one ever
they
talks
weren't.
like that.
People knew better.
Yeah, people, the church didn't even, the
It's still
idea of
kind
having
of
one
pure.
man as a spiritual leader who's not Christ, that was crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, does that make, hopefully that answers.
No, that does.
Okay.
Excellent. Yes.
Okay, so where does the Pope get his authority? The idea is apostolic succession, and the way this works is they teach that the first Pope was Peter, and then before he dies, he lays hands on the next Pope, or somehow passes the authority on to the next Pope, or the church chooses somehow. But basically, it's an election process, either by him or by the church in general, to say this guy is the next leader. And it is men deciding who's going to be their leader, right?
It's like a-
And that's the idea of
They're
apostolic
votes, right?
succession. What?
Don't they take votes or
But you
whatever?
kinda-
And that's how they do today, the cardinals vote.
It's very political. That's why they divided it in 1054, because one pope, did not like it,
Yeah, I agree, I'm the leader, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
One time they had two popes,
Yeah,
and they were killing each other.
yeah.
So he's
Ridiculous.
not appointed by God, definitely.
The point is that it comes from men
Yeah,
choosing other men,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And they will claim, well, God guides us, whatever, but you could say that about anything,
Mhm.
Lots of dictators say, well, God made me a dictator, so it doesn't always work that way. But the idea is the authority comes from men not a direct call from God, right?
Mhm.
And it's through this chain of command, and it goes through the proper ways that the Catholic Church does it, that the proper institution, and we select this man from among us, whatever. Whereas God, he might just call a farmer who no one ever heard of and say, you're my prophet, go speak, right? Good morning, nice to see you.
Verse 7.
Good morning, sweetheart. I'll come over too.
I mean, we could look at the greatest, good morning. We could look at the greatest prophet in the New Testament, which was John the Baptist. And did he have the proper schooling? Where did he come from, right? This is this guy that just came out of the wilderness, right? Wearing camel skin and eating locusts. And just, who is this guy out of nowhere? And then you had fishermen, and these were Jesus' apostles. And so it didn't go through these proper channels that the Jews had set up. But God called them, right? And you had a choice. If you were in the first century, do I go with what all these men say, who have all the proper authority from other men, or do I go with these men who they've got evidence from God, right? They're performing miracles, and what they're saying is in accordance to what the Bible says. Who do I choose? Which authority, right? That was the question. Okay. You'll also, let's look at this verse in 1 Samuel. The idea of having one man. Hold on a second. Let's look first in Luke.
Luke?
Yeah, Luke 22. Here's often what you find as one of the differences between when God calls a prophet versus when men set up their own leaders. Luke 22, verse 25 and 26. Can somebody read that for us, please?
Brother 22 what?
25 and 26.
Oh, thank you. But it shall not be so.
How about 24? I think that's the context, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. You can start with 24.
24.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said unto them, the king of the Gentiles exercised lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief, as he that doth serve. Up to 26?
No, yeah, that's fine. So interesting. So
This is good.
the leaders of the Gentiles lorded over each other, right? Men trying to control other men. But Jesus says it's not supposed to be like that in the church. Men are not supposed to be the dictators over other men.
I agree with you.
Right?
Right.
And that is often the difference that you find. When systems of authority are set up by men, they seek to control other men. But when God calls leaders, it's an even greater authority, and yet they do not seek to control others. Right? They give the message from God, and then that's between you and God. Right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice this, that, I mean, in the New Testament, you don't see Paul and so forth trying to go to the local authorities and say, well, he didn't listen to my teaching, so let's, well, he did that before he was converted,
That's
right?
right. That's
But
right.
after he was
His own
converted,
ways, yeah.
he had this great authority, and
He was free.
he didn't force it on people, right? And yet the men who try to have their own authority, they're the ones trying to force it on people, right? You see the difference, the way God works?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting to notice here, he makes a point about youth. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
He that is greater among you, let him be as the younger. Now that's interesting, because there's a lot of cultures, and it's okay to respect authority. That's something that's good. But Jesus undercuts that a little bit by saying, hey, God may call somebody who is not the one with the most gray hair, right?
Yeah,
David was very young, right?
Yeah.
What about Timothy,
Oh.
right?
He's very young too.
Paul told him, don't let any man dismiss you simply because you're young. You've been called by God, right?
God bless you.
So we got to be careful with that, because sometimes we just, we have this almost deference. And it's good to have respect for elderly, but is it possible for an older man to be incorrect and a younger man to be correct in the eyes of God? What about Samuel and Eli? Right? Samuel was this youth. He was called to be a prophet. Then you had the priest of God, the high priest, and Samuel had a message to rebuke Eli, right? So you see, it can work like it doesn't mean you just forget authority and forget respect for elders and so forth. That's not what it means. But God can bypass
use the young person to tell the elder.
All the generation of the elderly that came out of Egypt died in the wilderness.
Good point.
And the young people are the one that made it.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. So we're not to lord it over each other. And the idea of trying to have a leader who is to lord it over us is a really dangerous idea. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read this one, but you guys know the story, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 7, if you want to read that later. But the idea when Israel asked for a king, right?
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to have a leader, a king over them.
And this is during the time of Saul?
Yep,
That's
exactly.
the first king?
Samuel, and then they set up Saul. And in verse 7, here's what the Lord responded. He said, the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people, and all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should reign over them. So when you delegate a man as your spiritual leader, that's dangerous. That's exactly what Israel did. And that is, in essence, that's rejecting God as your leader. Because you're saying, I want this other man to think for me in spiritual matters, instead of listening for myself to find out what God wants, right? And by doing that, by giving the authority in spiritual matters over to another man, you may think, well, that's the easy route and I don't have to think, right? I'll just go with whatever, the Pope says or whatever, right? But in reality, there's danger because all the devil has to do now is get control of that one guy, right? So you just basically put a bullseye, and the same is true not only for popes, but it's true for pastors, right? The same is true for any spiritual leader, that you put a bullseye on that man. And all the demons say, all we got to do is focus on energy on this guy. So it's really doing a disservice to the person that you appoint as your leader. Because all the devil's got to do is get that one guy and he's got a whole group, right? It's dangerous. It's not a good idea. What are the dangers of following men's authority? John chapter 7, verse 45. John chapter 7, starting in verse 45. I'll read it for us. I'm going to read a couple verses here. This is the story where the chief priests sent the officers, the Roman officers, to go capture Jesus, right? So the question is, what is the danger of having men as your authority in spiritual matters? Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees. So they returned they were supposed to go get Jesus and they didn't. And they said unto them, why have you not brought him? The officers answered, never man spoke like this man. Then answered the Pharisees, are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed on him? Do you see their argument? Their argument is, we are the people in charge. We are the rulers. We don't believe him. Therefore,
why you believe them?
Why are you believing him?
You're deceived.
He must be lying and you're deceived, right? This is a logical fallacy, right? The argument by authority, right? And authorities are not always right,
That's right.
Who was the authority in Hitler's Germany? Hitler? Was he right?
No.
No,
But his
authorities
authority.
are not always right, Who was the authority in the first century in Judah? It was these leaders and Pharisees, the ones who cried out, crucify him, right? The ones who sent people to go arrest Jesus, they were the authorities, and they were wrong. This is the danger of putting men as your authorities in spiritual matters. Men can be wrong, right?
Very interesting, right? That they say, but this crowd does not know the law. It's a
Yes.
crowd. But then Nicodemus says, well, if you know the law says,
Yeah, he should be
Next verse.
judged,
Yeah.
don't judge him before.
you guys know the law, so you know what the law says?
Yeah,
Do not judge.
yeah, don't judge him unless you can prove it, right?
There's
And it's
also,
in-
I'm
go ahead,
sorry,
go ahead.
there's also some prejudice there too, because if you go up, to verse 40 where they say, truly this is the prophet, others said this is the Christ, but some said, will the Christ come out of Galilee? So
Oh,
no
yeah.
prophet has arisen out of Galilee.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's how the chapter ends in 52.
Yeah,
yeah.
To Nicodemus.
Yeah, so it's interesting also that in verse 49 it says, this people that know not the law are cursed. So they were like, we know the Bible way better than these people, right?
Right.
There's so many, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who have that view today, that, you should just, the average person, they don't know their Bible. And the spiritual leader, whether that be a pastor or priest or whatever, they know better, I'm just going to go with what they say, right? And this is the arrogance of these men. These people, they don't know the law, they're cursed. And we haven't believed it, therefore it must not be true, right? Instead of, what does the Bible say? And we have to be careful with that, because there are, there's different cultures. It's not necessarily so much American culture. You find it more in Hispanic cultures,
Also some Asian culture.
cultures. You have to be careful of the authority and hierarchy,
Yeah.
because it can cause you to say, well, whatever the authorities say, right? Instead of, what does the Bible say? Question?
Right, that can be dangerous because, that's how cults are, they grow.
Glad you brought
That's how
that
they
up.
grow. That's how cults are.
Glad you brought that up. You'll notice that in virtually any cult that you find this strict authority that comes from the great leader, right?
Yeah.
Or from a body of leaders. So unfortunately, the Jehovah's Witnesses, nice people. Not saying that they're all bad people. I know a lot of people who have been through that church, Brother has
He
had
came
some
from the-
association with them in the past, and got out of that, God bless, praise God, but everything must go through the Watchtower Society, right? One organization is the only one that's allowed to print. And if you ever have a Jehovah's Witness come to your door, and they offer you literature, try to give them a piece of literature back and see what happens.
No, they will not.
They are forbidden from taking it, right? If they're a good Jehovah's Witness, they will say no. Right? Because the church says they cannot take it, right? They're not supposed to. And so it's this strict authority from their organization to them. That's one thing I'm proud of in our church, is that there is no official Seventh-day Adventist publishing that's only one through one place.
Yeah.
You'll find it, there's
Well,
random publishing houses all over the church. You want to start one? Go ahead. Right?
I've noticed that. Yeah.
Right? There's
Yeah.
amazing
So I've
facts.
tried to find sources on it, but they don't.
It's
It's just diverse. Yeah.
it's very
Well,
diverse,
they're
it's very
diverse.
free. You've heard of Amazing Facts. It's not an official church organization, but it's
a ministry.
It's a ministry of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but
Great.
it's not controlled by the church.
Nope.
It's independent.
Independent.
Working in conjunction with, and there's all these type of groups, and
3ABN.
3ABN, they're very free and open,
Free.
and you don't get everything from one authority, because again, the danger is if it comes from one place, all the devil's got to do is corrupt that one place, and he's
Correct.
controlled all of them. That's the point.
I have a question. So Jehovah's Witnesses have their own
Their own-
version of the Bible?
Their own Bible, their own publishing, everything must be published through Watchtower Society.
Even the Mormons, right? The Mormons have their own thing too.
There's a lot of,
Yeah,
very-
they changed the
I mean,
book.
well, they have their own,
The Mormons, the
What?
Latter-day Saints.
Yeah,
What?
it's very authority. Okay,
No,
I want to look at one more thing as our way to, and I had a couple other verses here on the dangers of men's authorities.
they have their.
You can read this later, Acts 9:14 and Acts 26:10. This was Paul saying that he had received authority from the Jewish leaders to do what? To arrest and persecute and kill Christians. So he had gotten authority from the leaders, to do these things. I mean, the reason why these stories are in the Bible, it's not just so that we can have an interesting story to read. It's a warning so that we don't do the same thing. Do we think that humans were so much more corrupt in Bible times than they are today? What do you guys think?
I believe in the Bible times because they know the truth and they're still corrupt.
What about in these last days? Do you think,
More.
you think we're worse or better?
Well,
If anything, we're worse.
Yeah,
right?
worse.
Yeah, it's worse.
So if the church can be
Worse.
corrupted throughout the history of Israel, right? And then even when Jesus came, to the point where the religious leaders were given
And how much
authority to
more
go,
now?
how much more should we be worried and concerned about that today, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't fall into the same mistake. You need to go with what the Bible says, what God says, not what men say.
Amen.
I was reading about the tragic Florida shooting, and it was interesting because one of the major headlines on Fox News said, I can't remember who it was that remarked, said, we need to bring God back into our schools.
Wow. Yeah, that's.
It's really sad.
I mean, that's kind of an obvious one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about
In
that.
society in general,
Yeah,
you know.
that we need to have some
People
morals
often-
installed in
There's
our
no
children.
morals.
No.
Yeah. And the less morals you have, the more control you have to.
Well, Leah, she keeps talking about how she's being taught at her school about evolution. It's just, they're not, they're just so one-sided. They don't show any evidence for intelligent design, which there is.
By law, by force,
Yeah.
you're not allowed.
Sad.
That's how it is in a lot of like middle schools, elementary schools. Until you get to college, you can choose to what classes you take.
Yeah.
But still, it's if you take it like that.
And it's
It's a
really
good, a good point on authority as well, because competing ideas are silenced, right?
correct.
No other idea is allowed to be shared.
And it's also hard now because of gender issue too, even in schools. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable for us women to go to the toilet of the boys. So sometimes it's really hard, and because they make it now all gender,
Yeah,
and sometimes we're not comfortable to go there. And so what shall we do?
yeah.
Let's go to Iceland.
All right.
No, they're
Well,
gender
let's,
neutral.
let's wrap this subject up here. So here's the last kind of story I want to read for you guys, and we won't read the whole thing. You can read the whole chapter. It's Numbers 16. This is the rebellion of Korah.
What is this?
Numbers.
Numbers
Oh,
16.
numbers.
Oh, is this Korah?
The rebellion of Korah.
16.
Yeah.
Verse what?
The essence of the rebellion of Korah, what it was men's authority versus God's authority. Now, God does have authority in the church and in the world today.
Yeah.
But he speaks, he doesn't often go through the channels that men have set up, right? And it's not men's authority, it's God's authority. So, in the days of Moses, here's an obvious non-trick question for you guys. Don't overthink it. In the days of Moses, who was the authority on this earth?
God.
God was. And who did he speak through?
Moses.
Moses, right?
Yeah.
Moses the
Right?
prophet.
So, but was Moses was he the dictator?
No.
No.
Oftentimes he would tell people they would ignore him, and he would fall on his face into the people, right? But he was the one who spoke God's message, right?
Yeah.
But other men tried to take the authority, and this is what happened in the rebellion of Korah. Verse 1, number 16. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Now, Korah, the son of Issachar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, so he's a Levite, and such sons. Verse 2, and they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly. So they were the leaders, 250 of them. Famous in the congregation, men of renown.
Wow.
That's written in the Bible on purpose. Verse 3, they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and they said unto them, you take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, even every one of them, and the Lord is among them. And Moses, when he heard it, fell upon his face. So they're basically saying, look, we're supposed to be leaders too. All the congregation is holy, not just you guys. God can talk to us, not just you. Right? That was the idea.
Yeah.
Jump down to verse 28. You guys know the story. Moses basically told them, he fell on his face at first when they said that. He bowed down in front of them and fell on his face because he was a very humble man. And he told them, look, this is not, you're not coming at me. You're coming at God because God's the one who chose me to speak.
Yep.
Right? You're not coming at Aaron or me. You're coming at God. And so now we're going to have a way to decide who is the one that God's chosen to speak through and who isn't. And the test was, do you guys remember the test?
Point to him?
Censers.
Yeah, oh.
They had censers of incense, right? He said, all you 250 men, take yourselves a censer, put incense on it, and offer it before the Lord. And the one whose offering is accepted, that's the one God has chosen, right? And when God saw this, God said, because the people were backing Korah and the rebellion instead of Moses. And so at first God said to Moses and Aaron, separate yourselves from the people, I'm going to kill all of them.
Yep.
That was his first response. And Moses and Aaron pleaded with God, why should one man, all the men die because of just these men? No, God knew what he was going to do, and he was testing.
Oh.
He was testing Moses. He knew what he was going to do. He wasn't going to kill them all. But it was recorded to show us how seriously God takes this, because it was on the backs of the men, all the people, for supporting this rebellion as well. They should be punished as well. So instead, God said, okay, we won't kill everyone, but separate yourselves from the tents of these men, Korah and his sons and so forth. You better get away from their tents, because they're about to be punished, and you don't want to be anywhere near them when it happens, right? Verse 28, and Moses said, hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works, and I have not done them of mine own mind.
Yes.
Right? That's the difference between a prophet and simply a man who's claiming to have authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
A prophet is called by God. He's not doing it on his own will, right?
Mm-hmm.
If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth, and swallow them up with all that pertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then you shall know that these men have provoked the Lord.
Is that like a quicksand?
The earth just
Opened.
Just opened.
Okay.
And they were all buried.
And it came to pass, as they made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them. And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that pertained to Korah, and all their goods.
As Moses said.
As Moses said, as soon as he was finished speaking.
They were all swallowed up.
Here's the amazing part. Jump down to verse 41. I was reading this last couple nights ago. Verse 41. But on the morrow, which is the next day, right?
I just read that. That's incredible.
Tomorrow, the next day. Okay, they just saw the earth open and swallow men and then close back up, right? For their rebellion. The next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. You did it, Moses and Aaron. Wait. Moses and Aaron had the power to open the earth. They did that.
How quickly they forget.
Right? It's just,
These are
when I read this,
it's incredible.
It stresses.
But the thing is we have to realize that we are no better, right?
This is what I was going to say.
Just as
Isn't this a
dumb.
perfect example of what goes on today?
We can be
Of
just
what we
as
say?
dumb as this.
Exactly the same
right?
thing.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. We
So-
just did it and we will do it
So
again
quick
tomorrow.
to come back
The
and
next
complain.
day.
Well, it was the
Right?
same thing with the manna and the
Man's
meat.
a dance.
Why did you bring us out here and here's food from heaven?
So
Now we're tired of it.
exactly, right? So the idea, the point of all of this, and we'll end on this thought, is noticing the difference between authority from heaven and authority from men, right?
Yeah.
Moses had authority from heaven. He was a prophet of God. He passed all the tests of being a prophet. And when he spoke, it wasn't him. And in fact, he didn't even want to do it, right? When he spoke from God, it was God's word speaking, not him. And so the authority was from God. But these other men, these other examples, Korah and the New Testament and the popes today and so forth, and even some pastors today, the authority is not from God but from men. And the difference is crucial.
Yeah.
And so you have to go by what is God saying, not what does man say, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was an object lesson they used to do in the Jews used to do back in the day with kids, and they would tell their I gave this to a youth Sunday school one time, and they would have the kid, maybe about Kalia's age or younger, 8 or something like that, younger than Kalia, and they'd have them get up on like a counter or something, and they would tell the kid, jump down and I'll catch you, right? It's a trust thing. And the kid would jump, and the Jewish parent would get out of the way and let them fall. And then they would tell the child, trust nobody but God.
Amen.
Right?
What an
Isn't that interesting?
example.
Now we think of that nowadays, oh, that's child abuse or something. But that's how seriously they took it. That was the point, right? Because all men can fail you.
Amen.
And again, if you just let a man be the one that you trust for everything, all the devil's got to do is trick that one.
You would think they wouldn't want to jump off the table anymore.
Right? And then maybe they would tell their friends. And
Yeah.
Or tell their
the other
younger
kids would
brothers.
do it. But the point is, trust what God says. And where do you find what God says?
In
The Bible.
In the Bible,
In the Word.
and he speaks through prophets who wrote the Bible, right?
Yes,
Right.
amen.
All right. Hopefully that was clear.
That's nice.
Can somebody say a prayer for us?
Very, very good.
Can we have
Close.
this?
Oh, yeah.
Who's gonna pray?
Yeah, let's pray first. Somebody want to pray first?
Okay.
Please.